A lot of people have this
Yeah.
like belief that they need to make a ton of money, save up like 100 grand to put 20% down on a property and then fix it up and then potentially do Airbnb. From what I hear, a lot of your students have like $0 in and they
Yeah.
basically follow a
Yeah.
method. And
So yeah, subleasing is just a great way to get your feet wet. It's not like you're risking $80,000. You could launch a sublease with 10 to 15 grand. I have a student, 26 years young. Last month, she netted. This is crazy. I have the testimonial. She netted 60,000.
so I believe one of the biggest opportunities in 2023 and 2024 is going to be Airbnb. I think what's ultimately going to be happening here is we're going to see so many people that never considered Airbnb before start moving into Airbnb. And today I have Jorge Contreras on, and he's going to teach us a little bit about what's going on in Airbnb, some big trends, what to do, what not to do. And so Jorge Contreras, come on.
What's up?
What's up, man?
Thanks for having me, man. Thanks for the opportunity.
You got it. Yeah, you have 3,000 students.
3,000 plus students in the last 5 years. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen so many things happen in real estate probably the last 3 years. This big boom around 2020 and 2021 with record low interest rates, people jumping into house flipping and Airbnb. And then we started kind of, from what I've heard, a little bit of a pullback. But what I think is ultimately going to happen is Airbnb is likely going to launch.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is going to be this affordability crisis that we're in. Have you seen anything around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right now, definitely, I see a lot of people traveling less and spending less. There's definitely a contraction in the market, but I feel like we provide such a unique experience compared to what hotels can't, that I feel like Airbnb and short-term rental, especially with what we do with houses, it's always going to be a very unique opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. So I heard it was what, I think 2020 to 2022, 40% of all mortgages in America were taken out during that period at record low interest rates and record high home prices. And so what I'm betting is that what we start to see is people turn to Airbnb to bring more liquidity from their homes. So the people that end up needing to lease their homes out, they'll look at what they can get on a long-term rental compared to a short-term, and then they're going to start moving in that direction.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Is there a certain markets that you think are really great for Airbnb?
I always tell people to stick to primary markets, right? You always want to, for example, like all my properties are in California. So typically areas like Newport Beach, Long Beach, areas around LA City. And I'm not talking about Compton or Watts, but like the strong, desirable areas of LA, like Mid-City, Echo Park, Silver Lake, where usually rents are high, mortgages are high. Everybody wants to live there because you're in the middle of everything.
Right.
These strong primary markets are definitely performing really well compared to secondary and tertiary markets. Like when you go, we used to live in LA, right?
Yeah.
So if you go into the valley, west or east into the Inland Empire or Joshua Tree, a lot of those areas are struggling right now during this contraction. So definitely sticking to those primary markets.
So if in LA County, I know, rent and regulations is very strict. If you do leases shorter than 30 days, do you then somehow move away from some of those regulations?
So it depends. Like, for example, in the city of LA, you're only allowed to have one short-term rental permit per operator. But what we've done is I got one under my name, one under my wife, then my cousin, and then my mom. So that's one way that you can get around it. But again, in the city of LA, they also require the operator, the person with the permit, to live on site. But I can guarantee you that 95% of people don't live on site. And I'm not encouraging that. I always want people to follow the rules. But I just think that a lot of people are riding the wave because they haven't cracked down on that rule. Even though they made it, they're not really enforcing it. So people are just riding the wave until they do. But that is one of the challenges with short-term rentals is the regulation.
So in a place like Silver Lake, for example, where it's a very expensive, great location, massive gentrification the last few years, a traditional one bedroom would rent for what, $3,000 or $3,500?
Yeah, exactly.
But how about on Airbnb? What would they be able to pull?
I would say at least 30% more, 25 to 30% more is reasonable.
Got it. And so do you advise generally in a place like LA where it's pretty expensive to buy or to do a lease and then kind of sublet?
I always tell people that they should look at it as two phases, right? I think we can agree that the goal should be to own the real estate. You're never going to get more benefits from arbitrage in the long term than from owning the real estate, because that's where you get all the benefits. That's how a lot of entrepreneurs who invest in real estate become millionaires through their net worth because of the pure appreciation. But like perfect example is in early 2019, I wanted to replace my wife's 9-to-5, and I knew I needed 3 Airbnbs to do it based on my numbers from what I did in 2017 and 2018. But I didn't have the capital to go and buy And I didn't know any of these other creative financing strategies. So I'm like, man, I need the down payments, the closing costs, the furniture. I don't have the money to acquire 3 rentals.
Right.
But I did have the money to go and sublease 3 properties. And so it was a short-term goal to replace her 9 to 5. So I always tell people, go all in on arbitrage, replace your 9 to 5, get those 40 to 60 hours back, and then start buying real estate once you become financially free.
That makes sense. So you've been doing this since 2017?
Buying and doing short-term rentals. I started buying real estate in 2012. When I was 24, I started buying property. And in 2017, I launched my first 4 units on Airbnb that I already owned. 2019 went all in on arbitrage, and then 2020 started buying a ton of real estate.
Got it. Because I think a lot of people have this like belief that they need to make a ton of money, save up like $100,000 to put 20% down on a property, and then fix it up, and then potentially do Airbnb. But from what I hear, a lot of your students have like $0 in, and they basically follow a method. And
so subleasing is just a great way to get your feet wet. And at least for my audience, most of my audience are 9 to 5ers who want to become entrepreneurs. And so this is a great way, right? They got to hire a handyman, someone to do cleaning, someone to do maintenance, communication. So they start building these entrepreneurship skills with a low barrier to entry, right? It's not like you're risking $80,000. You could launch a sublease with 10 to 15 grand, depending on if it's a single family home or a studio. They start getting this experience, and then they could build from there. But like I said, I always tell people, start with subleasing, replace your 9 to 5, and then start buying the real estate. On the other hand, something that I started doing back since 2012, and I think you might have started this way too, is like house hacking, right? So like I had a mortgage of $1,500 with utilities. It was $1,800 back in 2012. I lived in a master, rented 3 rooms for $600 a pop, and then I started doing the exact same thing with short-term rentals in 2017. So I would buy a house like every couple years, do a split home ADU, and I would buy it with an FHA loan or 5% conventional. But I would Airbnb one side, live on the other side, live for free, and then do it again and again and again.
Yeah, so it's funny, like most of my friends that have done extremely well, and myself as well, when getting into real estate, they all focus on cash flow and building out equity and building out the next step versus like running out there trying to buy their dream home and then hoping that 9 to 5 continues to grow and the world works perfectly, and it never does. So
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. So LA is generally the area in which you focus on. Do you have any other markets that you work in?
So we're operating in San Diego County, LA County, Inland Empire, and then we had one in Joshua Tree. That was the one that was bleeding, and we just let go of that one. But all the other ones are still cash flow positive. But the ones that we have in secondary markets, like in the Inland Empire, again, it's just less cash flow. It used to be like $2,000, now it's like $800 to $1,500. The ones in the primary markets of LA County, those are still doing $2,000 to $3,000 in cash flow.
That's really, I appreciate you telling me about one that's bleeding, because sometimes people will leave out, because in business, not everything goes well. Like even if you have a great business, it's never like this. It's always like this.
Yeah. Let me elaborate. So we acquired this property in Joshua Tree, beautiful 4-bedroom, 2-bath, 2,800 square foot on almost 3 acres with a jacuzzi, pool, beautiful property with a view, and it was only like 2 miles from the national park of Joshua Tree. We closed on it, and right away we started losing like $4,000 a month because it was a long escrow. We bought it off market. It was my first time buying a property off market, and it took about 4 months from the time that we opened escrow to us actually closing. All these price modifications, and during that time is when we had the most amount of rate increases. So I think that our projections were telling us that we were going to make like $4,000 to $5,000 a month, but the market started contracting during that time, and so we started losing $4,000 a month immediately, and that went on for like 6 consecutive months, and then we ended up selling it and ended up losing another $30,000 in the back end. So it was like a $50,000-$60,000 loss.
Yeah.
But again, it was a great lesson. I don't see it as a failure because now, during the last recession, I didn't own real estate in 2008. I don't know if you did.
No.
I was maybe a little too young. But now that I'm experiencing this, I know to just stick to the primary markets. Like sometimes people have this belief like, you know what, I'm going to go to the cheaper areas. And maybe sometimes that works. But at least in this current market conditions, the people who have properties in those secondary and tertiary markets with short-term rentals are struggling. So my biggest takeaway is, man, even if it costs more, it's always going to be worth it to stick to those strong primary markets that hold their value more, their appreciation, and perform better from a cash flow perspective during times like this.
Definitely. What areas do you think are going to offer some of the most upside for, not just in like California, but in other places? Do you like
Yeah.
places like Southern Florida?
You know,
And
I have students that are doing really well in Dallas. Like I have a student, she just sent me a testimonial yesterday. She's 26 years young. She actually was born and raised in Venezuela. She's only been in Texas for like 2, 3 years.
yeah,
And last month she netted, this is crazy. I have the testimonial. She netted 60,000.
geez.
She did 100,000 gross, 60,000 net. She has 14 subleases all in the Dallas area.
So tell me, sorry to cut you off there, but tell me,
Sure.
how did that happen? Because to have 14 rentals, it doesn't just start
For
where
sure.
I think a lot of people think, especially with social media, people
Yeah.
just like blow up and now they have all this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what worked is her boyfriend had a lot of capital to deploy, and they partnered up with a real estate agent that was very familiar with like the markets, had a lot of relationships. Obviously, every time he would help somebody buy a property, instead of having them put it as a long term, he would like sublease from them. So that was like a low hanging fruit. The trust was already there.
Yeah.
And the relationship was already established. So yeah, between the three of them, or I guess her boyfriend and the guy financed everything, and she's the one like running the operations. And again, just to clarify, like this isn't something that happens every day. In fact, that's not even common.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes people put out there like the best story and say, "Oh, this is gonna happen with everyone who does short-term rentals in Dallas." But no, they went all in. Most of their properties are 3 to 5 bedroom single-family homes with game rooms. They got pools. They got jacuzzis. Definitely, they're probably putting like 25 to 30,000 into each property,
And they're leasing these, right?
and they're subleasing all 14. And they started about 2 years ago.
So what does that lease look like? When you're about to put 20, 30 grand into somebody's property, you obviously want to protect your back end
Right.
to make sure that the landlord's like, 6 months, 12 months in, he doesn't have a problem or
Yeah. So we're doing 2 to 3 year leases is what we're recommending, because let's say it doesn't perform as good as you think. And
Yeah.
maybe after it takes you 10 months to recuperate your money. You don't want to be in profit for 2 months. You want to be able to, keep that lease going. So we recommend for people to get 2 to 3 year leases, or at least have the option to renew after 12 months. And then at that point, they got to make sure that, they pay the landlord on time, make sure that there's a very minimal wear and tear, that they take care of anything that comes up with each reservation. So by the time it's the 12-month mark, the property is still in good condition.
right.
So
So when they list these properties, they're obviously, well, I would assume, they're not just doing what everyone else is doing. They probably have a certain system that they follow to make their listings pop more, get better reviews. I don't know if they do like virtual tours, but I would imagine to have that type of success making, 700 grand a year, that they probably have some type of
yeah,
system.
I always tell my students and just everybody on social media, like people stay at Airbnbs for two reasons. One, like I'm here actually at a conference this week in Miami, and I'm staying at a hotel because I was closer than any of the Airbnbs.
Yeah.
And proximity is power. But if I was staying at an Airbnb, I'd pick like the closest Airbnb because I don't want to drive 30 minutes every morning and every night. So I would book the Airbnb because I'm going to be at a conference, and I just for convenience, right?
Yeah.
The second reason people book short-term rentals is because they're going to have a staycation experience. This blew up during the pandemic, and that's where you have a property with a pool, a jacuzzi, a game room, and maybe it's a 3 bedroom, 2 bath. You could host 8 people or 10 people, and groups of family or businesses or colleagues get together just to have a great experience in the home without needing to leave the home.
Got it.
Now, what happens is when you cross those two, right, when you get a property, say, near the Miami Beach Convention Center, and it has all those amenities we just mentioned, then you like automatically are going to be in the top 3%, right? If the property's renovated, if they went all out on the decor, great photography. So we always tell our students, like, go for the better property because in the end, it's always going to make more sense.
That makes sense. So when they're building out their team, does it mainly consist of like property manager, a maintenance person? Like, what would you suggest for somebody that's
Yeah.
like they have a goal of, let's say, having what you did to
Yeah.
retire your wife? You have
Yeah.
3 rentals. What does that team look like?
Yeah, so there's really 3 operations in the Airbnb, right? You need somebody to clean, someone to do maintenance, and someone to do communication. So we typically hire a virtual assistant on Upwork.com
Yep.
that already has experience doing communication. So it's not like you're training in from scratch. When you go in there and you search on the talent section, Airbnb communications or Airbnb co-host, these people might already be operating 10, 20, 30 Airbnbs in different countries and already have the experience and will even help you run things more efficiently. So those are the 3 people, and essentially you are the manager. So if I'm launching my first Airbnb, I'm the manager, and now I have 3 technicians, right? Just like in E-Myth Revisited by Michael E. Gerber, he talks about the technician, the manager, and the visionary. So you
Yep.
got the doers, and then the manager who's managing the 3 technicians. So I teach them how to go into that role right away. I tell them, I don't want you doing cleaning. I don't want you doing maintenance. I don't want you doing communication, because if you do, now you're operating from like an employee mindset. And I want you to start thinking leverage. I want you to start thinking, how can I work on the business, not in the business? How do you automate this Airbnb? And while your team's cleaning it, I want you to go and start looking for the next one.
Yeah.
So they go into that role. Once they have 5 to 7 Airbnbs, then they bring an in-house manager, not a third-party company, an in-house manager that they could pay like a flat fee. Because if you bring in a third-party company, they're going to eat all your cash flow. Like a lot of times our net profit is like 30%. And if you pay them 30%, then now you're working for free.
Working for nothing.
So we teach them how to build an in-house system.
Got it. What do you think the future is going to look like for Airbnb? I hear like Starwood, for example, they have like 170,000 rentals.
Yeah.
And then you have Equity Residential, Sam Zell. I think he has like 130,000. I heard something that, those companies, along with some other large corporate landlords, are going to start entering Airbnb. Do you think that's going to be a thing in which it's going to bring more people into the space?
I'm actually not familiar with those 2 brands. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
Sure. So Barry Starlett, he owns Starwood. So it's one of the largest
Starwood.
multifamily and single family investors in America. And Sam Zell, they have a partnership with Airbnb to where they're going to start to bring this into a lot of their buildings nationwide.
And how many units do they own, or how many
Collectively
doors?
about 300,000.
And they're planning on entering the short-term rental market.
Yeah.
Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, so I think some really cool things are going to be happening in this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really interested. What are some of the...
There's 2 sides to it, right? Just yesterday, a buddy of mine sent me on Instagram this post that they're going to start imposing like a 15% tax on short-term rentals in California. And it's supposed to be for...
That's California, doesn't surprise me. Right?
I know, right? And I was like, geez, no wonder John went to Florida.
Yeah. California is like
I know,
absolutely
oh my
nuts.
God.
Today's video is sponsored by Great Credit Fast. Do you want to invest in real estate or possibly Airbnb? Maybe you want to start and grow a company or a business or possibly get debt free. With great credit, you're able to achieve all of this and much, much more. The last thing that you want to do is borrow money from a credit card company paying 25 or 27% interest, because when you look at the real numbers and you look at what's actually happening in the economy, that's the worst strategy, and it's almost a guaranteed failure. Take a look at this. So if you're borrowing $10,000 at a 27% interest rate, paying $250 a month, it's going to take about 9 years to pay this off and about $16,000 in wasted resources paid to one of these credit card companies. However, with great credit, you're able to do a balance transfer in most cases and get debt free for 0% interest and pay this off in a fraction of the time. In 2008, banks started tightening up lending restrictions, and that's exactly what they are doing now. They're getting ready to tighten up lending restrictions, meaning that if you have that low credit score, 400, 500, 600 credit score, if you're in that even low 700s, it becomes much more challenging to get access to money. But if you look at Blackstone, for example, Blackstone, they are using their credit and their relationships to raise money. They've just raised $30 billion to invest in single-family rentals. If you want to invest in real estate, you want to really grow and scale during the greatest wealth transfer of all time, you're going to need great credit to do it. We would love to give you a free consultation to see how we can help you at greatcreditfast.com. That's greatcreditfast.com, or give us a call at 561-430-5900. Now back to the show.
I was actually very surprised that he moved, or I don't know, maybe not surprised, because I've actually been following your content for a couple years.
I just had so many crazy things happen to me that I'm like, screw this. Like,
but anyways, so there's a lot of interesting things happening where it makes you think like, wow, we're not even scratching the surface. Things are going to go to another level. Like I hear stories like this. These big name brands that are entering the short-term rental market, but then you hear other things like, hey, they're going to impose this no tax, and then one of my buddies, he does a lot of commercial real estate, and he's telling me how some of the big hotels are trying to, get with the state and create more regulation to create more limitations on short-term rentals, because then it's going to help their hotel business. And sure enough, this new 15% tax on short-term rentals in California doesn't impact hotels. It's only like short-term rentals. So there's like these 2 sides that are like constantly competing. So it's going to be really interesting what happens. I don't think short-term rentals are going to go away. I think if anything, they're just going to try to make their piece of the pie as well. But I believe short-term rentals are going to be here for the long term.
I 100% agree with you. I think that they're here to stay. And I think what's very likely going to happen here is we're going to start seeing a lot of people, like I mentioned a little bit ago, to rent out their homes, and they're going to look for ways in which they can maximize profits. and short-term rentals probably seem like, especially in tourist areas, Dallas,
Yeah.
LA, South Florida, New York, some of these areas in
Yep.
which command higher rents and a higher cost of living. People are going to be like, you know what?
Yeah.
If because what's crazy is that the average down payment for a first-time home buyer between 2020 and 2022 is only 6%, and then a second home for people is 13%. So if you look at it like a median of like 10% down,
Right.
the cost of sale is 7, and interest rates basically doubled.
Right.
Most people don't have equity.
Right.
And so if they're like, okay, the job market's kind of softening and things are kind of changing, people definitely will be renting out their homes, I think, more and more often. And so like having an Airbnb strategy like what you're teaching and what you're doing, I think could save a lot of people and help people make a ton of money. What are some red flags people should look out for if they're going to explore that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just to kind of add on to what you said, there's a lot of people out there in that situation where now they're making less money, or they recently got, now they're unemployed. And short-term rentals is like the only thing that's going to be able to save them from not being able to pay their mortgage. So many people are relying on short-term rentals just to like cover their costs. But yeah, some of the red flags that you want to look out for, and this is mainly for larger homes, but anytime you have somebody from the same city, that's one, who has a brand new profile, like, hey, this profile was created in May of 2023, and they have no reviews, and they want to book your property next Friday and Saturday, that's like a red flag. Like the reason I think one of the biggest reasons we have a lot of regulation in short-term rentals is because all these people that have thrown parties. And if you think about it, right, maybe there's 8 people on the reservation, but now 22 other people came. They took up all the parking. They're super loud, more wear and tear to the property, and all the neighbors are upset. And that's one of the biggest reasons why even a lot of landlords are against subleasing their properties, because all they think when they hear the word Airbnb is party. And so those are some of the red flags that we usually look out for, is if they're from the same city, brand new profile with no reviews, and it's like a short notice booking on the weekend. You want to make sure you do some digging and, try to scare them off or just not accept the reservation.
Right. So when you start to have some success with Airbnb and you're starting to make some money, like that student that you mentioned making $60,000 a month, is she starting to pull some kind of some leverage or basically some risk away from Airbnb and saying, you know what, I'm going to do Airbnb full time. I'm going to double down on Airbnb, but I'm going to take some money out. I'm also going to start buying properties.
Yeah, that's the next phase, is they want us, now that they've really scaled this and they're doing really well, their goal is to start buying some real estate now and start diversifying from subleasing, which I think is a great idea. Like I personally have 8 that I own, 7 that I sublease, and 3 that I manage. And it's a really good portfolio, like balance, right? Because the co-hosting, a lot of people don't talk about co-hosting, but that's where if I manage your Airbnb and then you pay me 20%, but I didn't have to put any rent or any down payments, no closing costs, no furniture. Basically, I'm profit day one.
Yeah.
And
No
I
risk.
have a piece of all the upside, none of the downside. I feel like a lot of people are sleeping on this opportunity.
Yeah.
Subleasing is like the sexy girl in the club that everybody wants to dance with, but no one's talking about co-hosting. So I think it's great to, one of my students just messaged me 2 days ago. He's like, hey, I got 9 co-hosting. Should I go and get my sublease now? I'm like, dude, you have such a great system.
Yeah.
You're like literally printing money. Like even if you're making 500 or 1,000, those are great numbers compared to what the average real estate investor is making today with long-term. I was like, dude, keep printing money, go get another 3 and 5. And then maybe at the end of the year, let's talk about subleasing.
So what does that look like? Does he has a system in place?
Yeah.
He does like the outreach, and then he
Right.
pulls them into the system, and then boom, he does
yeah,
nothing?
let's talk about this, because I know especially right now with unemployment on the rise and more of it coming, a lot of people are trying to think of a side hustle and they have very limited capital. Like we see it all the time. I just did a webinar yesterday. All these people that applied for coaching, they're like, I want to do this, but I don't have a job and I have like 3,000 to my name. So here's a strategy that I think everybody listening here could really take advantage of, right? So we call it co-hosting. You're basically managing other people's Airbnbs. In exchange, you get a percentage of all the revenue, whether it's 10%, 15%, or 20%, it's all negotiable. But some of the people that you're co-hosting for, they don't always own the real estate, right? Like you might want to sublease someone else's property, but you don't want to be involved because you got your podcast, your coaching, you got the credit, all this legal stuff you're working on. So you want someone like me to come co-host for you, but you're like, hey, Jorge, I don't really have time to talk to landlords, and I know you have experience. What if I pay you to go acquire the property for me? So then I charge you now an acquisition fee, right?
Yep.
That acquisition fee, I have students charging from like $700 to like $1,700 for the acquisition, because they got to find the deals, analyze the deals, close the deals, sign the contracts. It's a lot of due diligence, verify the regulation with the city, verify the numbers on AirDNA Rentalizer, all that stuff. And then you might be like, hey, well, I don't want to set it up myself, right? My time's too valuable. Can you set it up for me? Now, me as a co-host, I'm going to put together a furniture list, a virtual like design. I'm going to order all the furniture from your Amazon account, coordinate that all the boxes go inside. And I'm going to go there with my team, and I'm going to assemble all the furniture, do all the decor, create the welcome books, create the listing, and be like, here you go, right? So there's acquisition fees, and then there's like setup and design fees. And then you get a piece on the back end. So now you got like reoccurring revenue on, man, this is like, I even got the chills talking about it. It's like so many more people should be doing this strategy.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you look at situations, people say, oh, what can I do to make money? There's so many things that people can do right now to make money. Like Airbnb, with what you just mentioned, is a situation in which you basically just have to have the work ethic, the mindset, and be organized enough to where you can put a team together and then find the leads, bring them into your system, and basically scale it up with no money in.
100%.
It's like an ideal type of situation.
Yeah.
What type of first steps should people be taking to kind of hop into Airbnb?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing is they want to acquire some knowledge. If I'm a brand new person doing this and then I want to co-host for you, you might be like, so tell me a little bit about your experience. Do you have a track record, or are you learning? Like, do you know what you're doing?
Yeah.
Because if you don't know how to do it,
Like,
then
take
that's
me
going to
through some of the ones you've done.
Yeah,
and
that's
like,
going to be risky for you. So I would say the number one thing people should be doing is learning this information, right? The more you know about something, the less risky it is. And the less you know about something, the more risky it is for you and for the investor. So whether it's listening to podcasts or YouTube or investing into a course, like, they should educate themselves, because at the end of the day, it's only going to give them a better return on their time and for their investors. That's like the number one thing. And two, they want to be join communities, right? Like, if you go on Facebook, there's a ton of Facebook groups, like Miami Airbnb hosts, or Miami short-term rentals, or Boca Raton, short-term rental hosts, whatever. Just type in the city and then short-term rentals, vacation rentals, or STRs, and you're gonna find all these communities of people that they're always talking about regulation, or hey, I need a cleaner, and just connect with those people, because you're gonna find a lot of co-hosting opportunities there. Or of course, if you're a part of someone's mentorship, you're gonna find a community there, because there's always gonna be people that have the money but don't have the time, and then there's people that have the time but don't have the money.
Yep, that makes sense. You mentioned regulation. When you hear of a situation like California, you mentioned that 15% tax.
Sure.
If you hear about something coming down the pipeline, are you concerned about it enough to where you would stay away? Or do you still move forward and you're like, I'll deal with it if it actually happens? Because in a place like California, they talk about so many things. Half of them come true, half don't. So what do you do with it?
Yeah, we'll just have to see exactly what pencils out, because like you said, they're always talking about, oh, they might impose this, but then does it actually happen or not? And then who knows, like, is it going to be on the gross? Is it going to be on the net? Does it start in 2 years? Like, when I got into Airbnbs in 2017, they were already talking about putting a regulation, and it took like, was it like they had started talking about it in 2015, and I don't think the regulation started until 2019. So it took like 4 years for it to begin. So it's better to just write it out, because what if you can make some really good money for the next 2 years?
Definitely.
And I always tell people, like, the money's great, but who you become in the process is even better, because that's where you're going to really make money, is acquiring the right skills, the knowledge, the information, building your track record that now you can go rinse and repeat in different markets.
So if you're going to start fresh, would you look to partner up with someone local in your area that's also, maybe you meet on like a Facebook group where you're like, hey, they're doing something, they're starting out, or they have some experience.
Yeah.
Let's see what they're doing and kind of do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great way, I think that's a great way to do it. Like, to partner with someone who already has a track record.
Yep.
And you could find a way to offer them value. So they might be like, you know what, John, I'm so busy working on my portfolio, I don't have time to find new deals, but I'll teach you how to find new deals. And if you find something that meets my criteria, why don't we partner up? And I think that's also a phenomenal way to get started. So many people, that's how they start in real estate.
What are some big red flags that people should look out for if they're maybe you've had, out of 3,000 students, I'm sure you've had some that have obviously done extremely well, and then others that maybe walked into a situation that they didn't see coming?
I mean, a lot of people don't make these mistakes in my community because we're super hardcore.
Yeah, definitely.
Like we always talk about the three most important things in subleasing, right? Number one, and in this order is like you got to verify the regulation, right? Can you get a permit in that city? If you can't get a permit, like don't even go there,
Right.
because even if you could make money and the numbers look great, it's going to be short-lived. And then second, now that we know you can get a permit, doesn't make money. So that's when we go into AirDNA. We want to make sure that the margins are there. That's two. If the margins are there and you can get a permit, the last thing is to get permission in writing. Every like couple weeks, somebody will DM me saying, "Hey Jorge, the landlord found out that I'm doing short-term rentals and now I got an eviction notice." I'm like, well, you should have learned properly, whether it was from a course or a podcast or YouTube.
Right.
Like, always get permission in writing. Like, all lease agreements say no subleasing.
Yeah.
Right? So you're in violation of the lease on day one. Get permission in writing, learn how to pitch landlords, and you do those three things, then you're good to go.
Yeah, I would imagine that a landlord would be very open-minded
Yeah.
if you were fully transparent about it from the gate. If someone came up to me and was like, "Hey, I know your rent's $5,000. I'll give you 5,200, 5,500, whatever. But my intention is to do an Airbnb,
Yeah.
and this is what I'm looking for." If they approach me like that, I would be much more open to, okay, like tell me a little bit about your model,
Yeah.
how you're going to get tenants, and
Yeah.
if they seem smart and bright, I'd be like, let's do it.
Not only that, but a lot of investors, either some of them might own other property or know people who own property. So if they have a great experience with you, they might be like, "Hey, John, my neighbor is actually moving out of their property and they want to rent it out. I've been working with you for 8 months. It's been great. Do you want me to connect you?" And so people miss out on those opportunities when they go behind their back. They end up like burning bridges.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you see people in your group that are looking forward and saying, you know what, I think that the opportunity is going to be very, very ripe for expansion of Airbnb throughout 2023, given the uncertainty in the economy?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're I think like 95% of like industries are like struggling, right? It's just with interest rates high.
Yeah.
Where it's just everyone, like everyone I talk to, my buddies who own restaurants are like, "Oh, I've been working for free for the last 5 months." They're like, no profit.
Yeah.
And it's like the same story with everyone. So I'm telling people to stick to these primary markets where they're still making money, but I wouldn't go and launch 30 at the same time. Like, you want to make sure you pace yourself, because what if they do another 3 rate increases
Yeah.
and then it gets worse? And there's a possibility that it'll get worse before it gets better, and you don't want to get caught with your pants down. So right now, I would kind of just be cautious in anything, right? Whether you're doing ground up, like, you just want to be cautious and not scale too quick in a time like right now, because some people believe, like I saw a video of Thatch Wynn yesterday. He's like, "No, this is the bottom." And
I saw that one, yeah.
And he was telling people, and I'm like, wow, that's a very interesting perspective. He's like, "No, this is the bottom, and it's only going to go up from here." But then you have other people, right, like PBD, who's saying, like, "We haven't even seen the worst, guys. There's so much, like, we've seen some unemployment, and that's the last phase of the recession, but we haven't seen the worst of it." Like, and I went to a seminar, not a seminar, but just a class in the FIBI, the For Investors by Investors in Pasadena. And Bruce Norris was there, and he was saying how all of his markers are pointing towards like a pretty 20 to 30% correction. He said the only thing we need is a reason for people to not be able to pay their mortgages. He said, and that would be the tipping point. And he said, and that would be unemployment.
Yeah.
And he always writes a book where the title of the book has to do with what he thinks is going to happen in the future. And one of the 2 possible titles, I don't remember the other one, but the second possible is 1% interest rates. And this is just his belief, right? And that guy's been right about California real estate like 10 out of 10 times for the last like 30, 40 years.
Wow. So he thinks interest rates are going to go back down there?
He believes that interest rates will go up, keep going up. And this is like maybe 3 months ago that he said this. And it'll cause, again, a tipping point on unemployment, because then obviously margins decrease. People start, firing people. And now people can't pay their mortgages.
Yeah.
Right. And so then it would create an influx of supply, which would then bring prices down. And then the only way to stimulate the economy, like they did in 2009, is to bring down interest rates. So he believes that we will have 1% interest rates in the near future.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because never in time,
Right?
never in history have we seen people who are like Thatch. He's a smart guy. I watch a lot of his content, crushing on TikTok, and like PBD, he also is very bright. He's an insurance guy, so he's constantly underwriting risk. So it's like a lot of bright minds have different opinions. One thing I think everyone can kind of agree on is nobody knows what Jerome Powell's going to do, because who could have predicted 12 or 13 rate hikes in like 12 months, right?
Crazy.
Like, some of my really smart friends are like, "Oh, they're going to stop hiking in January." And they've hiked, multiple times since then. I think what we're going to likely see here is an affordability situation. And I think a lot of these small banks, we could start to see more of
Yep.
those problems if they continue hiking rates. Because if you look at, Ken Griffin, the CEO of Citadel, you know who he is?
No,
Yeah.
I know Citadel, but I don't know the CEO.
So Ken Griffin, he was like he's the wealthiest hedge fund manager in the world. He's like absolutely crushing it. He came out and said that consumers have $1 trillion in savings, and they're burning 120 to 140 billion a month. By the end of the year, they'll be out of money.
Wow.
And I'm looking at that. I'm
That's
like, okay,
crazy.
well, if we see that, I think what we're likely going to see probably is like banks kind of contracting a little bit, and so those that have business models such as Airbnb, where they can bring in some revenue, where they have very little capital that they need to bring to the table. And we start to see a lot more influx in towards Airbnb and towards other business models. We're going to start to see people that have access to money be able to go out there and pounce on opportunities when everyone else is kind of like in a position where they're sitting with record high debt and they don't know how to get access to money.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens, all these different perspectives. But like Robert Kiyosaki always says, don't vote for tails or heads, like stand on the edge. There's 3 sides to a coin. So I think that's the right thing, is you kind of need to stand on the edge and kind of see what's going to happen and not over leverage yourself, like be calculated.
Yeah. What do you think about house flipping and Burr and other strategies like as we step into the next year or two?
Personally, I've never done wholesaling. I've never done flipping. And I mean, I've done Burrs. That's how I purchased like some of my properties. So I mean, like right now, we have 3 ground up developments.
I think I saw one of those on your story.
Yeah, one's in escrow and 2 we closed in the first quarter. But the margins are so big, like they're all like over 7 figures in exit, that even if the prices drop 30% based on our performance, like we could still pay all the investors back, and that's something that gives me a lot of peace.
That's in California though, right?
Yeah, there are 2 in Mid City and 1 is in Echo Park.
Oh, cool. I love those pockets.
Yeah.
I really like that USC pocket.
Yes.
Like that was that I went to a USC school in like 2017. Like they had like a little certificate program. I remember one night I was sitting there watching YouTube videos. I'm like, what am I doing? Like I need to learn more about real estate, and so real estate development in LA. And so I signed up for this class. It was like $5,000. At the time, it was a lot of money. I'm like, $5,000 for this class. I took off 3 months of work, and I did this class from like 7 a.m. to like 5 p.m. And I would go and learn about real estate, and it was like a really, really awesome experience. There was like a lot of architects and engineers and different people that worked in the city that were in this class, and learned a ton. And I mean, it really kind of like changed my life, the way that I look at real estate, putting yourself in a position to like learn and get around people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yeah. But yeah, so we got these 3 ground up developments, but now we're like, all right, let's not get any more of those under contract. Now let's focus on value add. Actually, one of my next moves is acquiring like a hotel. So I'm looking at, I've always been fascinated by the idea of hotels ever since I got into short-term rentals, because I always like to be 10 steps ahead. I'm like, okay, let's just say Airbnb's got banned.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of Airbnbs because you have a business operating on top of the real estate. So it's like cash flow on steroids. And so the idea of a hotel is like, you can't ban it because they have a specific license that regardless of regulation with short-term rentals, that doesn't impact them. And I love that idea.
That's really smart.
And especially if I go into, like, for example, I just found this 35 key property in Culver City I'm looking at right now. And Culver City is obviously part of a city of LA, so they're part of that regulation. So that just means there's less Airbnbs, less supply, because you can only get 1 permit. Not everyone knows the strategy I mentioned earlier. And what if they do start cracking down and checking, like, hey, is the operator actually living on site like they're supposed to? All that demand's still going to be there. There's just going to be less supply. So if I acquire a hotel and do a value add and implement a lot of these amenities and strategies I've been doing with short-term rentals, I think it could be like a really solid opportunity. So that's one of my next moves.
Yeah, I love the mom and pop hotel niche.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is that group got hit especially hard 2020, 2021. And many people took out record high loans on these properties to offset the costs that they were going through. And so now they're in a situation where
they got to refinance.
They got to refi.
Yep.
And so if you're able to go in there and pick up some of these mom and pop shops and then increase the value, I mean, it's a huge, huge win. So I think it's a really, really cool idea. Would you ever go into different markets, or are you mainly focused in California?
That's a good question. The reason I'm crazy enough to stick around in California is because my 2, I have a couple different partners, but 2 of my 3 partners are really strong operators.
Yeah.
And man, they both have been working in the LA market, one for over a decade. He used to work for some really big equity firms. like private equity firms, and
Yeah.
while working as a W-2 for them, he did like 1.6 billion in ground up development. He even had equity in like a downtown LA building, charter schools. This guy just is like a Steve Wozniak in ground up development and value add. Like he just knows the city of LA like the back of his hand, and he's such a strong operator.
Yeah.
And then the other guy's been doing, flips and wholesales and these luxury flips, and he has great systems for operations and what types of finishes. And I'm like, man, these two guys, I could build something like a really strong foundation with some of these projects, but in our backyard.
Yeah.
And honestly, over there, for many years, all of us have done so good in this market. I know a lot of people go into, Texas and Florida, and it's a much more, landlord friendly state. But despite some of the challenges with that in California, like we've been still able to, so far, right, we've been still able to perform really well. But I know there's like a new 5% tax that they're
It's a mansion tax, but
things,
like
right?
I personally think that for what you're doing and what I would be doing, it wouldn't really apply to us.
Okay.
Like you're not
So
going to
it's
go out
only
there.
on mansions?
Well, they say it's a mansion tax, but ultimately it's commercial real estate, land,
Oh my
industrial, single family. It's any type of property, right? So it's like,
California loves taxes.
but it's like 5 million to 10 million is 4.5%, and then above 10 is 5.5%.
Okay.
So you add in agent costs, transfer taxes,
Right.
escrow. It's like 12, 13%. So it's
Yeah.
expensive, but I don't think it really matters to people that are going out there trying to get into Airbnb or people that
Right.
want to do house flipping
Right.
that are new, right? But it's funny that you say that, like having that team. I had a builder in LA that was absolutely just incredible. We met in a handshake. He did a ground up project for me. No contracts, nothing. I paid him over, it was like 260 or 270,000 for construction. And he basically would just let me know when he needed a check. And like, he was always on time. It was like unbelievable. And now I feel like, if I were to try to do something in Florida, the odds of me getting that experience again, where I wouldn't have to micromanage the project, seems unlikely. So like, I understand what you're saying.
And like really good operators like to be very hands-on. Like they go to the sites twice a week, 3 days a week on their way to this meeting. Like they like to pop in and check in, and they're both like that. And I feel like, when you're working on these types of real estate deals, you need to have really strong operators, because if you're just good at acquiring but don't have the back end systems and the team, it's not going to work. And so we have such a great system for what we're doing in our backyard that for the foreseeable future, we want to keep doing projects there. And then if we ever have to pivot into a different market, then at that point we'll cross that bridge.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, man, you're doing some really, really big things with Airbnb. And where can people find you? On IG, obviously, you're crushing it there.
Instagram, make sure it's the one with the blue check mark, because there's a ton of fake accounts out
Yeah.
there. But at the Jorge Contreras.
And you're also on, I think, TikTok too, or
yeah,
are you on
TikTok,
YouTube?
YouTube. I have a little solo podcast. Yeah.
Cool. Well, man, thank you so much
I
for
appreciate
coming
the
on. You're a
opportunity.
bright guy.
Thank you.